Hi, everybody. Been a while. Hope you've been well. Sorry I didn't upload any good stuff about feminist ethics. And now we're moving on to a new unit where we're reading Three White Men. And your white male professor is uploading lots of great stuff about it. All I can say is yikes. Sorry about that. Please believe that it was a result of bad timing due to our crazy new circumstances, not anything against feminist ethics. Feminist ethics is awesome, and your discussion posts about it have been great too, so thanks a lot for those. Now, despite those issues, this new unit of this course, Unit 3, Distributive Justice, is exceptionally cool. So much of politics and of ordinary life is concerned with who should get what and why. We all have intuitions about how to answer those questions, and some of those intuitions are self-serving while others are more impartial. But by the end of this unit, we'll all have a much richer, deeper, more honest understanding of the profound issues here and how we might be able to make progress in making our world more just. And the last part's important since our world seems pretty unjust. Or at least, our world is very unequal. So this picture on the screen now represents what's sometimes called the income parade, which was an experiment, or kind of a thought experiment put forward in England several decades ago. And it imagines that incomes of people are represented by their heights. And you imagine an hour-long parade where people are walking by in that parade, and their heights represent kind of the shares of different groups of people of world income. Now, in this imaginary scenario, the first half hour or so of the parade would be very strange because people walking by that time would be tiny. Those would be the kind of people representing the lowest half of the income distribution. It wouldn't be until about 20 minutes in that people would even reach 2 feet tall. Right before that, they'd be less than 2 feet tall. But then for the next half an hour or so, 20 minutes or so, the middle 20 minutes, people would be kind of more or less normal height, right between 3 feet and 6 feet tall. So that would be the kind of unsurprising bit of the income parade. But then things would get very strange, especially for the last 10 minutes or so. About the last 10 minutes, you have people all of a sudden now being about 10 feet tall. In the last few minutes, you'd have people up around 20 feet tall. And then for the last 30 seconds or so, you'd get the absolute bizarre fact of people walking by at hundreds of feet tall. In the very last minute, or very last couple of seconds, it would be people around 1,000 feet tall, right? And this thought experiment is supposed to show kind of just how unequal our world is. And of course, you looked at other representations of that, less metaphorical representations in the PowerPoint that I uploaded a couple days ago. So one way of thinking about this unit we're doing now is what are the relationships between inequality and injustice? Put differently, how equal does a just world need to be? Now, as I mentioned in the previous slideshow, the three philosophers that we'll consider in this unit give very different answers to those questions. Robert Nozick gives a more right-wing economics answer. He says that there's really no correlation between justice and equality. Right? A just society might be as unequal as we can imagine. Kai Nielsen, who we'll read last, gives a more left-wing answer. He says that a just society is one that roughly has universal material equality. Where we all have roughly similar amounts of stuff, right? Wealth and income, money, and so on. And Rawls, who we've already read, he gives the more in-the-middle kind of answer. And he says that a just society is one that might have inequality, but any inequalities have to be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. And we'll talk about what that means today. So you've now read Rawls, and you've had some time to think about it, and if you followed instructions, you have not read the Nozick or the Nielsen. Now, we read the Rawls first because, as we'll see, both Nozick and Nielsen devote huge parts of their writings to showing what, in their view, Rawls got wrong. And we're also doing Rawls first because he is by far the most influential of these three philosophers, at least as things stand now. So without further ado, let's get into it. So here's Rawls's, remember we talked about Rawls's basic argument. Here's the first premise of that argument. It says, a distribution of life's distributable goods, for example, income and wealth, is just if and only if it's fair. Now, justice and fairness might strike you as synonymous, as meaning the same things. If so, that's okay, but here's what Rawls means by bringing our attention to the relation between justice and fairness. All right, that's what he says. Now, you might have an immediate objection to this idea and say, well, look, life's not fair, so we shouldn't stress about trying to make the government or the economy or society fair. Now, I think Rawls has an interesting response to that kind of objection, and he says that it relies on an equivocation. Okay, there's Rawls there on the left. Here's what Rawls says. He says, no one deserves his greater natural capacity, nor merits a more favorable starting place in society. Okay, that's the sense in which life is not fair. But it doesn't follow that one should eliminate these distinctions. There's another way to deal with them. The basic structure can be arranged so that these contingencies work for the good of the least fortunate. Thus, we're led to the difference principle if we wish to set up the social system so that no one gains or loses from his arbitrary place in the distribution of natural assets or his initial position in society without giving or receiving compensating advantages in return. The natural distribution is neither just nor unjust, nor is it unjust that men are born into society at some particular position. These are simply natural facts. What is just or unjust is the way that institutions deal with these facts. Right? So even if there's kind of these background inequalities or what we might think of as injustices, kind of just in the nature of things, that doesn't mean that we can't try to make society just or fair. Now, here's a just quick note. That picture of Rawls, I'm going to include it whenever we have a direct quote from Rawls on one of our slides. That'll be a kind of visual cue to help you refine Rawls passages here if you ever want to. And just so you know, I've uploaded a copy of this slideshow without audio to D2L this morning. Okay, so that's the first premise, right? Distribution is just if and only if it's fair. Now we get to the more substantive stuff. So the second premise says, a society's distribution is fair if and only if everyone in that society could rationally accept or agree to that distribution. Now, this might be the most important premise. I think everything else about Rawls's theory hangs on this basic, fundamental, profound point, that there's this relationship between fairness and rational acceptance. Now, this basic point, embodied in Rawls's premise 2, is also an important version of the key idea of social contract theory. So social contract theories argue that a government or a state is legitimate if, but only if, everyone it governs does or would, in certain conditions, agree, that is, would consent to, its rule. Right? The idea is that for a state to be legitimate, it has to be justifiable to every one of its citizens, every one of its members. So you might have heard of some of the more famous social contract theorists in history, which include Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We'll come back to Locke when we talk about Nozick in a couple of days. You should read them all, though. They're all very, very good. Now, Rawls is firmly in this social contract tradition. Although in this selection, he isn't talking about governmental legitimacy broadly, but only about distributive justice, which is a bit narrower. So why is this second premise so important? Well, think it through. If there are people in society who could not rationally accept the way things are set up, then they should not accept that setup, right? Rationality requires them to rebel, maybe, right? A society that can't be rationally justified to every single one of its members is, in a crucial moral respect, illegitimate. Right? It's almost like a kind of a dictatorship, right? Illegitimate in a way a dictatorship is. Right? Another problem with societies that can't rationally be justified to each of its citizens is that these societies are going to be prone to instability, right? Since people will tend to see that they're getting screwed, and people don't like that, and so revolutions happen.